First, I'd like to say my great appreciation to be invited to be on this panel at such an important anniversary, especially when the world is going through tectonic shifts that represent ontological and epistemological challenges to the West and Eurocentric domination of the world. As a historian, what I would like to focus on here is the emergence of what we can call the radical wing of the Bandung or the Third World Project, which is tricontinentalism, right? And it's important. We've already heard people talk about the need for an anti-imperialist revolutionary movement, and I think the tricontinental movement that emerged out of the Bandung movement, so to speak, and coming out of Cuba in 1966, is a very important historical development that we need to reflect on. The Solidarity Conference of the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, more widely known as the Tricontinental Conference, convened in Havana, Cuba in the early days of 1966. It was the largest international revolutionary gathering ever, perhaps, with more participants than had attended even the grand Soviet-led Communist International Congresses of the interwar years. From January 3rd to the 15th of 1966, 512 delegates and 270 observers and guests discussed and debated anti-imperialist and anti-neocolonial theory, practice, and strategy. Okay. The strategy. Their objective, nothing less than to unite the so-called third world struggles for national liberation and social emancipation. It was a symbol of the peak of the global anti-colonial movement, and the Tricontinental's defining characteristics was its popular nature. Or as one journalist of the time memorably remarked, quote, the delegates were not governmental representatives and therefore not bound by the public policies of their home countries. Indeed, they were committed to militantly, revolutionarily standing in world affairs, end of quote. The Tricontinental was part and parcel of the wave of anti-colonial, national liberation, revolutionary struggles and movements that swept Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean in the aftermath of the Second World War. Critical in its spirit was obviously the 1955 Bandung Conference. We also have various meetings of the Afro-Asia Solidarity Organization and, of course, the formation of the Non-Aligned Movement in 1961. Together, these developments marked the emergence of the Third World Project, which at times referred to the newly decolonized countries of Asia and Africa and of Latin America. The Third World Project sought to ameliorate colonialism and imperialism within the existing interstate and world economy. In short, it aimed to change the balance of power between the North and South by reforming the international order. An offspring of the Third World Project, the Tricontinental went beyond the goal of more reform, seeking not only to radically change the relationship between the Third World and the West, but also to transform in a truly revolutionary manner Third World societies. The Moroccan socialist Mendy Ben Barker, the principal architect and organizer of the Tricontinental Conference that was held in Havana in 1966, explicitly articulated the meeting's revolutionary objective was to blend the two great currents of world revolutions, that which was born in 1917 with the Russian Revolution, and that which represents the anti-imperialist and national liberation movements of today. End of quote. Thus, the Tricontinental can perhaps be viewed as a logical outcome of the deepening anti-imperialist struggles of the 1960s. While Bandung marked the origins of post-colonialism as a self-conscious political philosophy, the Tricontinental represented a more developed version, as some argued. Emerging out of the turbulent 60s, the Tricontinental seemed to be at the apex of the coming world revolution. We wish it had unfolded. The Algerian and Cuban revolutions had ushered in the 1960s, while the raging Vietnam War and resistance of the Vietnamese to the United States was a singular conflict that defined it. Moreover, across Latin America and Africa, there were a series of armed struggles, from insurgencies in Bolivia, Uruguay, and Venezuela, to wars of national liberation being waged in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. The United States itself, viewed as a chief imperialist power, was also engulfed in a revolutionary wave, epitomized by the growing international stature of the Black Panther Party. Indeed, revolutionary fervor and possibility gripped the imagination of the world. And I always like telling my students in my courses about the revolutionary optimism of the 1960s. I don't have time to go into it, but I think it's important, and Professor Desai pointed out that the Bandung itself comes out of a series of, reflects the spirit of a series of conferences organized not only in the wake of the Russian Revolution, but there's also Pan-African congresses and so forth that unfold as well, that are very critical and so forth. The call for tricontinental revolution the call for a tricontinental revolutionary gathering reflected the growing and increasingly irreconcilable divisions between radical and conservative wings of the Third World Project. And we've heard that mentioned already. National liberation of the Third World was now seen as indivisibly fused with social transformation within Third World countries. Now, I want to make a point, and I think it's important to bear in mind. We talk about movements, we talk about grand processes, but history is made by people of flesh and blood. And I think it's important to basically pay homage to Mendy Ben Barker as a socialist leader who was central to this, who envisioned and wanted to merge third world liberation with socialist revolution. In seeking to unify third world revolutionaries, he warned of the dangers of neocolonialism, arguing that meaningful decolonization required a revolutionary break with the existing order. The coming conference, that is the 1966 conference, represented not only for him, not only the radical trend within third worldism, but also the definitive alignment with a radical anti-imperialism located firmly in the socialist camp. The alignment of the revolutionary wing of the anti-colonial movement with the socialist world was unequivocal, despite the need to navigate the challenges posed by the contradictions that have already been spoken about that existed. However, while the divergent views and approaches of these existed within the anti-colonial national liberation struggles, it represented a very particular challenge, right, in terms of achieving unity among third world revolutionaries. And these challenges were not viewed as insurmountable. As we see in the emerging, and this sort of reflects some of the talk about BRICS and so forth, that these challenges, these contradictions, these tensions are seen as insurmountable, right? But at that time, they were not seen as insurmountable. In 1965, Barker, Algerian President Ahmed Ben Bella, and Cuba's Che Guevara met and laid the foundation for the Tricontinental Conference. The priorities established for the conference were anti-imperialist solidarity, support for the Vietnamese struggle, and support for Cuba. The global call and agenda was sent out, with Barker calling for greater coordination in the struggles for all peoples, as the problems in Vietnam, the Congo, and the Dominican Republic stem from the same source, U.S. imperialism. Of course, it's important to understand that Ben Barker did not live to see the fruition of his work. On October 29, 1965, he was kidnapped in Paris, never to be seen again. Obviously, a collusion of the French together with the Moroccan government and so forth. There's various talk that his body was actually may have been dissolved in a barrel of acid, right? But it's what's important here, and I think this is critically important, given the context we're living in now. It is also evident that Ben Barker's central role in organizing the Tricontinental was the real reason for his assassination. The Tricontinental was considered by Washington a direct threat to the security of the United States, since one of the main tasks of the Tricontinental was to provide financial and military support for various national liberation struggles and to unify them. In short, Ben Barker's ability to rally the worldwide anti-imperialist movement reflected the growing momentum of revolutionary developments across the South, which was viewed by the West as unacceptable challenge to its hegemony. In fact, you can see this almost hysterically reflected in various declassified U.S. documents. Here's one document I'll quote from you that came out from the Senate. Quote, "It is humiliating enough to have the international communist conspiracy seize control of a country only 90 miles from American shores and maintain itself in power despite all the pressures we have thus far brought to bear. It becomes 1,000 times as humiliating when that country is transformed into a headquarters for international revolutionary subversion, while the OAS, the Organization of American States, and the mighty United States of America, they say in this U.S. document, look on helplessly and apparently incapable of any decisive action." The Tricontinental was cast by Western intelligence analysts as an existential threat that presaged and initiated a global assault on Western imperialism, opening an era of international guerrilla warfare. In this context, Barker's murder cannot be seen as an isolated event. It reflected the West's intense response to the burgeoning Third World Revolution. It is not inconsequential that the Tricontinental was preceded by the overthrow of Indonesian President Sukarno in 1965, which set in motion the mass killing of hundreds of thousands of suspected communists. The Tricontinental only amplified the perception of a significant threat to the imperial order. Washington orchestrated a concerted global campaign of subversion, assassination that targeted national liberation movements, particularly its leadership. Che Guevara in 1967 is killed, Amilcar Cabral in 73, and I could go on and go on. And I think, this, in a sense, does not portend well when we see U.S. imperialism in decline as a wounded beast seeking to maintain its control. What I think is also important here, and there's so much to cover, okay, is that where we see the impact Bandung and the Third World and the Tricontinental, the Third World Project and the Tricontinental Movement is in the new international economic order, which has often been forgotten, right? Where the ideas of tricontinentalism continue to resonate with a great effect. In 1973, the Fourth National Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Algiers called for the establishment of a new international order. Key NIEO economic proposals centered on substantial and lasting increase in raw material prices, reduction in debt, more favorable terms of trade, transfer of technology, and so forth. And in fact, however, it went beyond pure economic stipulations to also make political demands. While primarily articulated through the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the new international economic order aimed to revolutionize the international order from within, a compromise between the Tricontinental's revolutionary vision and Bandung's reformist spirit. The declaration on the establishment of a new international economic order, adopted by the UN General Assembly on May 1st, 1974, reflected core tricontinental principles, including a whole series of prescriptions and so forth that I really can't go into at this time.
If you would wrap up, Isaac, soon. I think you were already, just remind.
Yeah, so I'd like to say that, this tricontinental signaled the possibility and promise of third world unity, global South unity. The possibility was thwarted and the promise unfulfilled. Nevertheless, whatever its limitations and disappointments, the tricontinental took the concept of solidarity amongst the peoples and nations of the South, and it only briefly made it a reality. Their idea and mission still retain relevance and urgency, and I would argue, given what we see unfolding today, has returned with a powerful vigor. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.